I'd been counting down to this trip for almost half a year, crossing off days on the calendar like a kid waiting for Christmas. My wife, Claire, and I had both been buried in work, stress, and routine for so long that a 16-day cruise felt like salvation. When the morning finally came, it was like stepping into a dream we'd been chasing for months. The flight to Australia was long, but even that couldn't dull our excitement. Claire had spent the entire ride flipping through the cruise brochure, pointing at restaurants she wanted to try and activities we'd probably never actually do, but liked pretending we would. When we finally reached the port, my breath caught in my throat. The ship loomed over everything, a gleaming behemoth of glass and steel that looked more like a skyscraper tipped on its side than anything that belonged on water. It was impossible to take it all in at once. The endless balconies stacked like a hive, the decks crowded with tiny dots of passengers, the banners welcoming us aboard fluttering in the sea breeze. Claire gripped my hand so tight her nails dug into my skin. She was practically vibrating with excitement. "We're really here," she whispered. "This is actually happening." Stepping aboard was overwhelming. The lobby alone was more extravagant than any hotel I'd ever stayed in. Polished marble floors reflected chandeliers that seemed to hang impossibly high, and the faint sound of a string quartet drifted down from somewhere unseen. People milled around with drinks in their hands, staff members in crisp uniforms greeted us with practiced smiles, and for a moment, I let myself believe we'd stumbled into another life entirely, one where nothing existed except comfort, leisure, and luxury. The first 2 days were exactly what we'd dreamed. We swam in infinity pools that looked like they spilled directly into the sea, tried out more restaurants than our stomachs could handle, and wandered the upper decks, watching the endless horizon blur into shades of orange and pink at sunset. One night, Claire and I sat on our balcony with champagne, listening to the steady churn of the water as the stars came out one by one. I told her this was going to be the best trip of our lives. She leaned against me and said she couldn't imagine anything going wrong out here, cut off from the world, floating on endless blue. But on the second night, things shifted. Claire fell asleep almost immediately, worn out from swimming and wine. I stayed up a little longer, scrolling on my phone, the faint hum of the engines a strange kind of lullaby. Eventually, I drifted off, but sometime after 2 a.m., I stirred awake. The sheets beside me were cool. I assumed she'd gone to the bathroom. Half asleep, I rolled over and froze. There was breath on my face, hot, ragged. My eyes snapped open and there she was, kneeling right beside my side of the bed. Her face was inches from mine, her hair damp and stringy, her skin glistening with sweat even though the air conditioning thrummed softly. Her eyes were wide, too wide, staring directly into mine without blinking. She panted like she'd run miles, each exhale brushing across my cheek. My stomach twisted into a knot. "Claire?" I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. She didn't answer. She just knelt there, staring, chest heaving until slowly, too slowly, her breathing calmed. She crawled into the bed on my side, pressed her lips close to my ear, and whispered in a voice that didn't sound like hers, "Get back to your side." Then she rolled over, shut her eyes, and within seconds was asleep, her chest rising and falling peacefully. I didn't sleep. I lay rigid, heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake her, staring into the darkness until the gray of dawn finally seeped into the room. The next morning, when I told her what I'd seen, she laughed. She said she only remembered getting up to pee and nudging me because I'd rolled into her space. She insisted I dreamed it. "You and your horror movies," she teased, pressing a kiss to my cheek before ordering breakfast to the room. When the food arrived, Claire pulled the lid off her tray, then immediately gagged. "Don't you smell that?" she asked, recoiling. I leaned in. Pancakes, bacon, eggs, perfectly normal. She pinched her nose, tried a bite of bacon, and spat it out immediately, her face contorted in disgust. "It tastes rotten, like raw meat." I tried it myself. Perfectly fine. She shoved the tray at me, begging me to get it out of the room. I carried it down the hall to the trash, unease prickling the back of my neck the whole way. When I returned with a bowl of fruit from the buffet, she ate it without complaint, though she kept glancing at the door as if listening for something. Later that morning, Claire went to shower while I lay on the bed watching TV. The sound of running water was oddly soothing, and before long, I drifted off. When I woke, the shower was still going. More than an hour had passed. I knocked on the door, no answer. My chest tightened as I pushed it open. The bathroom was freezing. No steam, no fog, just the sharp slap of water hitting porcelain. My throat constricted as I pulled the curtain aside. Claire stood motionless under the icy spray, her head tilted slightly, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring right at me but not seeing me. Her skin was flushed red where the water struck it. "Claire!" I shouted, grabbing her arm. She jolted, gasping like she'd just woken from a dream. "Jesus, you scared me," she said, shutting off the water. When I told her she'd been standing there for an hour, she looked at me like I was crazy. "I just got in. You must have fallen asleep longer than you think." I didn't argue, but my hands trembled as I handed her a towel. That afternoon, we went down to the infinity pool. The water was warm, the sun high, and for a while, things felt normal again. We floated together, laughing, sipping cocktails. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. But then her smile faltered, her eyes fixed on something just over my shoulder. I turned, nothing but water and strangers drifting lazily in the pool. When I turned back, Claire was gone. Panic surged through me. I ducked underwater, opening my eyes against the sting of chlorine. She was right there, inches from my face, her eyes bloodshot and wide, staring through me. Her hair floated around her head like a dark halo. She drifted closer, so close I could almost feel her lips brushing mine. An instant made me recoil. I shot back to the surface, gasping, but she didn't follow. I dove again, heart hammering, grabbed her by the shoulders and hauled her up. Her body was limp, heavy in my arms. For one terrifying moment, I thought she was gone. Then she blinked, smiled, and kissed me softly on the cheek. "Why do you look so scared?" I couldn't answer. At dinner that night, I started noticing things. The waiters kept glancing at her, not at me, at her. Their eyes lingered just a fraction too long before darting away. Once I caught one whispering to another as Claire reached for her glass. When I asked if something was wrong, they forced polite smiles and shook their heads. Later, while Claire browsed the gift shop, I overheard two older passengers at the bar. Their voices were low, but I caught fragments. "Always starts the same way. Night terrors. Then the water." My blood cold. I leaned closer, but when they noticed me listening, they fell silent and walked away quickly, leaving their drinks behind. I wanted to chase them, to demand answers, but Claire returned with a necklace in her hands and a smile that made me bite my tongue. That night, I tried to convince myself it was all fine. We curled up together, watched a movie, even laughed. For a few hours, she was just my wife again. But around 2 a.m., I woke to find her lying on her side, facing me. Her eyes were open, locked on mine. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, and her breathing came in sharp, ragged pants. "Claire?" I whispered. She didn't move. Her skin was icy under my touch. Suddenly, her smile widened, and she let out a piercing shriek that split the silence. I stumbled backward off the bed, my ears ringing. When I looked up, she was crawling across the mattress on all fours, her movements jerky, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. Her eyes never left mine. She scuttled in circles, faster and faster, her limbs bending in ways that didn't seem possible, before finally stopping at the foot of the bed. Slowly, she stood, her head tilted far to one side, her eyes glassy and wide, her lips pulled back into a grin that didn't look human. She stayed like that for over an hour, silent, motionless, just staring. And then, as if nothing had happened, she crawled back into bed, shut her eyes, and fell asleep. I sat against the wall until morning, too afraid to move, too afraid to close my eyes.
The next morning, Claire woke up humming.
humming. She stretched, kissed me on the cheek, and padded over to the balcony like she hadn't just spent half the night shrieking and crawling like something feral. When I asked how she'd slept, she said, "Best night yet. Why?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her everything. The kneeling, the pool, the screaming. But every time I opened my mouth, the words tangled in my throat. How do you tell the person you love that you're afraid of them, that they don't seem like themselves anymore? Instead, I said nothing. We spent the day exploring the ship, or at least I pretended to explore. My mind wasn't in it. Every hallway felt too long, every shadow too sharp. Even in crowds, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong. Claire seemed different. She smiled more, but it never quite reached her eyes. She lingered too long by the observation deck, staring at the horizon like she was waiting for something. That evening, she ordered seafood for dinner. Grilled fish, mussels, shrimp. She devoured it like she hadn't eaten in days, her fingers slick with butter and salt, her lips glistening in the low light. I barely touched my plate. I just watched, unsettled, as she gnawed a shrimp shell down to shards and swallowed. The man at the next table stared too, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. When Claire noticed him, she turned slowly and smiled. He paled, muttered something about not feeling well, and left his meal untouched. I leaned in. "Claire, what are you doing?" "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "You're scaring people." She laughed softly, licked her fingers one by one, and whispered, "Only you see it that way." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening. Around 3 a.m., the mattress shifted. I pretended to be asleep, my breathing slow and steady. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her rise. Not stand, rise. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though every bone in her body cracked into place with each step. She moved to the balcony door and slid it open. Cold sea air rushed in. I almost called out, but something stopped me. Instead, I stayed still, barely breathing, watching as she stepped outside. She stood at the railing, hair whipping in the wind, and leaned forward far too much. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought she'd throw herself overboard. But she didn't. She just tilted her head back, opened her mouth wide, and let out a sound that wasn't human. It wasn't a scream, not exactly. It was deeper, guttural, like the groan of the ship's hull mixed with the distant roar of waves in a storm. It carried out over the water, swallowed by the night. When she finally closed her mouth and turned back inside, her eyes found mine instantly. "You're awake," she said. Not a question, a statement. I couldn't respond. The following day, I tried to speak to one of the staff members, a housekeeper, a young man who seemed nervous from the start. I pulled him aside, asked if he'd noticed anything strange about my wife. His face went pale. He shook his head too quickly and whispered, "Sir, please, don't talk about this," and walked away so fast he nearly dropped his cart. Later in the lounge, I tried again, this time with an older passenger who'd been whispering about the water. I cornered him near the bar and asked what he meant. His hand trembled as he set down his drink. He said, "You need to stop asking questions. She'll hear you." "She?" I pressed. He looked past me, his eyes widening, and shook his head. "It's already started. God help you." Then he walked away, never looking back. That night was worse than all the others. Claire lay still at first, her breathing slow, steady. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined everything, that she was fine, that I was losing it. But sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of wet slapping, like bare feet on tile. I sat up. She wasn't in bed. The bathroom light was off. The balcony door was shut, but the sound persisted, closer now. I turned my head slowly and froze. She was on the ceiling. Her hands and feet pressed flat against the plaster, her body arched downward, her head twisted around to face me. Her hair hung like seaweed, her mouth gaping wide, her eyes huge, black in the dim light, and locked on mine. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. She scuttled across the ceiling, jerky, unnatural, until she was directly above me. Slowly, her head lowered until her face hovered inches from mine, upside down, her breath hot and reeking of salt and rot. Then she whispered in that same voice that didn't belong to her, 14 more nights. The words crawled under my skin, cold and final. And just like that, she dropped onto the bed, curled into the blankets, and fell asleep. I sat there shaking until sunrise. Now I don't know what to do. I don't know what's happening to my wife. I don't know what's happening to me. Every time I try to tell someone, they shut me down. Every time I look at her, I see less of Claire and more of something else, something wearing her skin. We still have 14 nights left. 14 nights trapped on this ship, in the middle of endless water with no way off, and no one willing to help. If anyone reads this, if anyone can hear me, please tell me what's happening. Tell me how to stop it, because I don't think my wife is my wife anymore, and I don't think I'll survive the rest of this cruise.
I was 11 when my parents dragged me on another one of their endless vacations, a cruise that promised all the fun a kid could want, or so they claimed. For me, it was the same old story. Long flights, crowded ports, endless lines, and no privacy. Mom and Dad thrived on this sort of chaos. They seemed to have some endless reserve of energy and wanderlust, while I was left trailing behind, trying not to get bored, or worse, lost. Back then, there was nothing to keep a kid entertained. No portable consoles, no endless streaming shows, nothing. My parents even banned TV, claiming that anything worth knowing about the world had to be discovered in real life. Screens can't replace exploration, Dad said, and Mom nodded solemnly. I would have traded the entire cruise for a Game Boy, or even a stack of comic books. But I had to make do, wandering around the ship alone sometimes, keeping myself busy by watching the crew or peeking into areas that were clearly off limits. It was during one of those little wanderings that I learned just how easy it was to get left behind. My parents, lost in their own conversation, didn't notice me slipping away. I was somewhere near the dock, trying to find a quiet spot to read the brochure about our next stop, when I realized the ship was gone. Just gone. At first, panic washed over me in waves stronger than any ocean I'd ever seen. I ran across the pier, calling for my parents, tears streaking my sunburned face. I felt utterly helpless. Then I saw her. She was wearing a uniform I didn't recognize, a cropped shirt with the cruise line's logo and denim shorts. Sun-kissed and smiling, she looked like she belonged to the sea itself. "Hey there, Beansprout. Are you lost?" she asked. Her voice was calm, warm, and for some reason, it made my chest unclench a little. Her name was Josie, and just like that, I felt safe. Josie didn't brush me off. She stayed with me, walked me around, and tried to find help. The port authorities were polite but unhelpful. One suggestion was that I fly to the next port to meet my parents. The other was to catch a ship heading in the same direction. Both options felt like they would stretch on forever. I was terrified, and even then, the thought of spending more hours alone made me tremble. Josie didn't hesitate. She held my hand and told me everything would be okay. We eventually found a pair of crew members who said we could board their ship, a different line from my own. Something about them unsettled me. Pale, stiff, too precise in their movements, like they were performing a role rather than being human. But with Josie guiding me, I stepped aboard anyway. The first strange sign was when they told us there was a storm advisory and we had to stay in our cabin. Meals would be delivered, no wandering. That didn't make sense. Usually a storm advisory meant seasickness, not lock-ins. But Josie's calm presence kept me from panicking outright, at least at first. Later that night, I woke to her whispering urgently, "Something's wrong." I couldn't see much, just the faint glow of the corridor lights through the curtains. I felt my chest tighten. The window showed no stars, no moon, nothing but a black, featureless void. The water below didn't move, not a ripple, not a wave. The ship hung in silence as though the world had been paused. And then came the scream, high-pitched, ear-piercing, cutting straight through my chest like lightning. I clutched Josie's hand and froze. Another scream followed, layered with tones so wrong it made my stomach lurch. I felt nausea, vertigo, a sharp pain behind my eyes. My instinct screamed at me to run. We stumbled out into the hallway, the air heavier than normal, thick with some invisible weight pressing down on our shoulders. I felt like the ship itself was alive, like it was holding its breath. Something deep in my chest told me we weren't just being watched, we were being hunted. The corridor twisted and turned longer than it should have been, lined with pipes that echoed every tiny sound. At the end, we came to a door marked "Personnel Only." Something tugged at me, a curiosity I hated in retrospect, and we slipped inside. The room was huge, metallic, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made shadows crawl along the walls. Piles of uniforms from various cruise lines were scattered around. But what caught my attention and made my blood freeze was the cage at the far wall. Large, imposing, built from metal bars and shipping containers, it loomed like a prison for something unimaginably wrong. Two men in gas masks entered, flanked by a sedated older man in khakis and a patterned shirt. They stripped him down, nudged him toward the cage, and I watched in horror as dozens of hands erupted from the darkness inside. Human, inhuman, deformed, severed, decayed, too many to count. They grabbed him, lifted him into the air, and dragged him into the cage. His scream still echoes in my mind. Blood sprayed, but the darkness swallowed it, sucking it back as though the room itself was feeding. Then came the sound again, a tritonal wail that made my stomach drop, my knees buckle. Josie grabbed my hand, pulling me back, but the room seemed to pull us forward. The masked men spotted us. They moved faster, and for the first time, I truly felt fear. Not just panic, but pure, unfiltered, mind-shattering terror. We ran, hallway after hallway, the walls twisting, the lights flickering. My chest burned, lungs screaming for air, but Josie didn't let go. She pulled me, faster and faster, until we burst onto the deck. Stars returned to the sky, the water seemed normal again, but the men were still there. Tearing off their masks, I recognized them. My stomach sank. We hit a dead end. Josie grabbed a deck chair, threw it into the dark water, and then did something I'll never forget. Still holding my hand, she threw me overboard. I hit the water hard, the cold swallowing me instantly. My head spun, lungs burned, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later, drifting on a broken piece of deck furniture, discovered by a family on a small boat. Doctors said I couldn't have been in the water more than a day. No one could explain the missing time. My parents never knew I had even left port. I was catatonic for days, unable to tell anyone what happened. The memory haunted me for years, resurfacing in fragments, shadows, whispers. But one thing never left me: Josie. Her name stayed with me, echoing in my mind. Years later, on a road trip with my fiancée, we stopped at a small grocery store. Behind the counter was a framed photo of a young girl. I froze. Her smile, her eyes, I knew them instantly. The store owner noticed me staring. "That's our daughter," he said quietly. "She worked on the cruise line every summer, loved the ocean, never came back." My fiancée asked softly, "What was her name?" The man's voice caught slightly. "Josephine, but everyone called her Josie." And I knew, finally, that some things, no matter how much time passes, never truly leave you.
I was on the run. I don't want to say why, because I don't want to incriminate myself. Though, if anyone from the authorities does read this, I could most likely enter a plea of mental disorder. No sane person would surely claim to have experienced what I did. I'd been sleeping rough down by the docks, which was not as bad as it sounds. I'd found a sheltered place, a covered lock-up bay for bicycles that no one seemed to use. I had a good sleeping bag and a sad face that worked wonders for getting changed from passing strangers. All good until I noticed I was being eyeballed by the occupants of a passing patrol car. Easy come, easy go, I thought, putting my hands in my pockets and walking away as nonchalantly as I could from my spot. I did not want to take any chances, so it was time to move on. One of the few things I can say with any certainty about my deadbeat life is that I've usually gone with the flow. The other kids were stealing cars, so I did the same. There was easy money moving drugs around on behalf of the local dealer, so that became my thing. When matters escalated, when the thing I don't want to talk about happened, I was part of a crew, bad people that I fell in with, going with the flow. I rounded a corner and a cruise ship came into view. It looked like it had seen better days, I thought, then noticed there was a walkway from the side of the docks attached to the ship, and no one in sight. The flow took me up the walkway and onto the ship. Everywhere I looked, I saw cracked paint and stains and cobweb after cobweb. Faded bunting hung limply from railings and water pooled in gaps in the decking. I could not see anyone paying to take a cruise on this ship. For my part, I've never felt guilty about taking a free ride in my life, and the only destination I cared about was away from here. I'd still seen no crew, but did not want to push my luck, so I hunted around for the nearest place to hide. A loose cover over a lifeboat later, and I was snuggled up in the dark, and just in time as I could hear shouting, boots clattering. The flurry of mollies passed, I chanced to look out from the lifeboat and saw a dozen or so wooden crates being manhandled up the walkway. I was starting to think this was a cargo vessel rather than a cruise liner. Maybe once, 20 or more years ago, it had welcomed on board passengers for voyages of pampered luxury. Surely not now, though. Then I heard new voices. Men talking animatedly and sounding like they were heading my way. I ducked back under cover and waited. Soon after, I felt the ship rattle beneath me, felt as much as heard it creaking and groaning, and then with a worrying lurch, it started moving. I started to relax. I had left one lot of troubles behind, and the future was unwritten. It was not long, though, before my bladder ruined my sense of calm. I was bursting, but did not want to go in the lifeboat, as I had no idea how long I would need to hide out there. So, real cautious, real slow, I emerged onto the deck. I seemed to be alone. Relieved, I relieved myself. The deck on this part of the ship was empty apart from my lifeboat and a row of sun lounges. It had turned into a hot day, and I would have loved to have settled into one of them, but dared not risk it. My business finished, I climbed back onto the covers and got as comfortable as I could. At some point, I fell asleep. After stretching my aching limbs in the confined space of my new home and yawning, I lifted the cover a little to see if the coast was clear so I could head out and try and find something to eat and drink. It was fine, and I was soon back on deck, still alone, the only passenger it seemed to me. A bit further down the deck, the doors to what I assumed were cabins remained closed, and it looked like the shutters on the small windows of each were down. My theory that this was now a cargo ship rather than a passenger vessel appeared more and more likely. This was reinforced when, an hour or so later, we approached a new harbour. I had no idea where we were, but the dock we pulled into was even more run down than the ship. Crouching low and glancing constantly around, I watched as more boxes were loaded. These boxes seemed to rattle and were dotted with what I thought could be air holes. Livestock containers, I assumed. Some poor beasts being transported under conditions which must have been illegal. I decided to go in search of food and something to wash it down with, while I hoped the crew were fully occupied loading their new cargo. I got lucky finding an unlocked storeroom with tins of corned meat and, wonders of wonders, a crate of beer. I took less than I wanted as I did not want to make it too obvious there was a thief on board, and scurried back to the lifeboat. Filling my belly with salty robbery meat washed down with warm beer, it started to feel like a home from home. Until the cries began. At first, I thought it was just the ship creaking, its old metal and wood protesting, but soon it became horribly clear they were the cries of living creatures.
The livestock, it must have been. They almost sounded human. It was horrible. I wiped my face, feeling suddenly hot. Whether it was the hideous sounds or the warm beer and cold meat, my stomach lurched. I hurried back out onto the deck and leant over the side of the ship where I was violently sick. I stood there, gasping and shivering. Night was falling, and I watched the last of the light slip away. Thankful that the only sounds I could hear now were the of the ship and the water lapping at its hull. And then, a click. I turned, saw it was one of the cabin doors opening. I swore to myself. There was no time to get back into the lifeboat, so I ducked under its prow and made myself as small as possible. A man emerged from the cabin. He wore a long black coat and moved with a slow, easy grace. He walked with a silver-handled cane, though for show rather than any need of it, I believed. Under the light of the stars and a quarter moon, his skin appeared pale. His head was shaven, with the intermingling lines of a tattoo reaching up one side of his face. The sight of him made me shiver, and I tried to retreat further back under the lifeboat. As he began to promenade along the deck, more cabin doors opened and more figures stepped out. There were about a dozen that I could see. Each was draped in black. Their pale countenances were expressionless. Some appeared to be male, some female. All their heads were shaven. A variety of intricate facial tattoos seemed to be the only distinguishing marks. Not a word was said between them as they took in the night air. I watched, entranced and unsettled in equal measure. There was something otherworldly about the passengers, something which set my nerves on edge. I would have fled if I could, but as it was, I had no choice but to cower in my hiding place and hope that none of them would spot me, even though their stroll along the decks was now taking them right past me. A new figure appeared. He was dressed in a white uniform and carried a tray holding narrow, ornate glasses filled to the brim with a dark liquid. A companion followed in his wake. Together, they began to move among the passengers, offering drinks which were eagerly taken. For all their strange appearance, the passengers had, up to that point, shown a degree of finesse. That seemed to be cast aside as they greedily swallowed down their drinks in one, then proceeded to lick the glasses with long, slim tongues that flickered out of lips stained dark red with the liquid. The passenger closest to me smiled, a tight, controlled movement. I felt sick when I saw his teeth, saw sharp bestial tips. I closed my eyes. Like a child hiding from something that should have remained within its imagination, I could not see any more without losing control. Hours later, a morning that I thought would never come crept into the sky, and the deck was once more deserted. The passengers had returned to their cabins. I stayed in my hiding place and before long saw the crew carrying objects bundled inside tarpaulin on deck. One by one, they tossed their loads into the sea. It was the carcasses of the livestock, I thought, then glimpsed a hand in a gap in the tarpaulin shroud as it struck the gray ocean. A human hand. 10 loads in all were discarded, 10 bodies. They floated on the surface for a moment before slipping into the depths. There was no blood pooling on the surface, no sign of life.
I thought of a creature that had also traveled by ship from its ancient home to English shores, of legends and myths. I thought of the cries I had heard, and cold fear passed through my body as the truth dawned on me. I thought of sly smiles and crimson-stained lips and razor-sharp teeth, of the hell which awaited me on this ship when night once more fell. I crouched there and wept. The sun was high overhead when my chance presented itself. We were once more approaching a dock. I saw crates lined up, waiting to be brought on board. Imagined glasses brimming, ready for the passengers to drink their fill. I took my chance and clambered up onto the side of the ship, then plummeted into the water. I made it. I'm sitting on a beach now, sipping a cold drink. It is a beautiful day. But I know now that there are creatures out there that care nothing for the day, that wait for the sun to dip below the horizon. I know now that when night falls, fear returns.
This all happened a little over a month ago, while I was on vacation with my parents on a Mediterranean cruise. It was one of those trips that seemed perfect in every way. Sun-drenched decks, endless buffets, the gentle rocking of the ocean beneath the hull. But one night changed everything. I stayed up later than I should have, sneaking quietly out of our tiny cabin to stare at the stars. The sea was endless around me, and being so far from land, the night sky was incredible. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of diamonds, and the sheer number of stars was overwhelming. I lay on one of the deck's loungers, letting the cool night air wash over me, thinking about life, the universe, and everything else that seemed so small in comparison to the infinite night. The deck was mostly empty, though a few passengers wandered in pairs or small groups. At first, it was calming. The soft creak of the ship beneath my feet, the gentle lapping of waves, the distant hum of machinery, everything felt like it belonged. I lost track of time, staring upward, marveling at streaks of color in the stars, some blue, some white, others tinged with hints of purple or yellow. Occasionally, I'd spot a faint comet or the trailing glow of a far-off eclipse, and my heart would leap in excitement. Eventually, I realized most of the lights on the ship had been turned off. The majority of people had returned to their cabins, leaving only a handful scattered about. But the more I looked, the more something felt off. Everyone I could see was standing completely still, rigid like statues. Their heads all tilted slightly toward the same side of the ship, as though fixated on something unseen. One man even pointed toward the dark water, frozen mid-gesture. My stomach dropped, a cold chill coiling inside me. I stepped cautiously toward the railing, straining to see into the blackness below. The sea was calm, reflecting the dim moonlight, nothing out of place. I scanned for waves, for bubbles, any disturbance, but there was nothing. Absolute, unnatural stillness. My chest tightened, and I felt a prickle of fear crawling across my skin. And then the lights went out completely. The deck was swallowed by darkness so thick it felt almost tactile. My muscles froze, my pulse spiking, every instinct screaming at me to flee. The buzzing in my ears made it difficult to hear anything, but the silence of the frozen passengers was worse. No alarm, no warning, no hint that anything was wrong. Just a blanket of black pressing down on me, heavy and oppressive. I forced myself to move, inching toward the stairs to retreat back to the cabin. My steps were careful, deliberate, trying not to make a sound. And then I heard it. A splash, heavier than any wave hitting the hull. Slow, deliberate, wrong. My mind raced. Pirates? That would have been a simpler explanation, but something in me knew immediately that this was far worse. My legs carried me to one of the loungers, and I dove underneath, pressing myself flat against the deck. I wished desperately that I had gone inside the ship, but for some reason I hadn't.
That mistake would soon make itself painfully clear. The sounds continued, splashing, then a heavy thud against the ship's side, followed by scratches. Scratches that grew louder and more urgent. Something was climbing the wall. Something enormous. I could hear the scraping of hard, jointed limbs over metal. I couldn't tell how many there were at first. One? Several? My fear made my mind imagine dozens. I pressed my face to the deck, eyes squeezed shut, trying to will myself invisible. Then, against every instinct, I opened my eyes. What I saw made my stomach twist. The creature was there, just a few feet away. Its legs were long and black, jointed like a crustacean's, but thick and rigid. Its arms were massive, meaty appendages that clung to a dark, amorphous head. Pustules dotted its surface, and every so often, a black liquid oozed out, catching the faint moonlight in horrific glimmers. Its body was grotesque, a jumble of nightmares fused together, part crustacean, part cephalopod, part something I didn't have words for. It moved with horrifying purpose, going from person to person, wrapping its front limbs around them. From the tips of these limbs sprouted smaller tentacles that clung to the heads of the frozen passengers, probing, as if it were searching but not taking. I don't know why, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't killing them, or at least not immediately. It was searching, observing, examining, blindly, perhaps, sensing through the creatures it touched. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. My body was locked in place as my mind screamed at me to run. Minutes, or was it hours, until the creature seemed satisfied with its search and dragged itself toward the stairs, disappearing below deck. The relief was instant, but short-lived. I remained under the lounger, tense, listening to the faint scrape of its retreating limbs. Time stretched, endless and torturous. I didn't dare move until the first hints of dawn tinted the horizon red. That's when it returned. The creature moved with terrifying speed, a bundle held in its meaty arms. The bundle shifted and twitched slightly. My stomach lurched, my heart hammered, my mind pieced it together. The man who had been pointing earlier, the one the concierge later described as missing, was the bundle. The creature had taken him, for reasons I would never understand. It moved quickly, scratches returning as it clambered over the railing, disappearing into the sea with a splash. I waited, unmoving, until the first signs of dawn tinted the horizon red. Passengers slowly began to awaken, stretching and blinking as if emerging from a long trance. They looked confused but unharmed. Their rigid positions from the night were gone. My body ached from tension, my arms cramped from holding myself still for hours. I returned to my cabin, collapsing onto my bed, too exhausted to sleep. But I couldn't. I heard the faint rustling of sheets, the subtle noises my parents made in their sleep, and I stayed motionless, afraid to attract attention. The alarm finally went off. Running footsteps echoed through the hall, voices shouting. A concierge banged on our door. My father opened it, confused. "Have you seen a man in his 30s, dark-skinned, dark-haired, on the outside deck last night?" the concierge asked, panic evident in his eyes. My father denied seeing anyone. I stayed silent. I couldn't tell anyone what I had witnessed. They wouldn't believe me. The man was missing. His wife had reported him gone. The crew feared he had jumped or met some other tragic end. My mind immediately connected the dots. The bundle the creature had carried. It had been him. The trip was cut short. An investigation began and we disembarked at the next port. The cruise line offered apologies and promised a free future trip, but I didn't care. I needed to be away from the sea, away from the memory of what I had seen. Even now, I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the scratches on the deck, the sloshing and dragging of that thing.
My mind remains alert, even in exhaustion. No one believes me. I've only told a few friends and they chalk it up to nightmares, but I know the truth. I'll never forget the creature or the bundle it carried into the sea that night, and the paralyzing fear that gripped me under the starlit sky. And I will never, ever return to that water. Even after leaving the ship, the memory of that night clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The investigation by the cruise line seemed thorough on the surface. They interviewed crew members, checked security cameras, and spoke with passengers, but the truth of what I had seen was something none of them could ever acknowledge. The missing man was never found, and the official story leaned towards suicide or accidental disappearance. They chalked up the strange behavior of the frozen passengers as some kind of mass confusion or delayed reaction to the storm advisory, but I knew better. The days after disembarking were surreal. My parents tried to act normal, as if the terror I had experienced didn't exist. We continued our trip on land, visiting coastal towns and historic sites, and they encouraged me to forget about the water and enjoy the vacation. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those crustacean-like limbs, felt the heavy weight of its meaty arms, and heard the scratches across the deck. I couldn't convince myself that it had been a dream. In the evenings, my nightmares were more vivid than ever. I dreamed of the frozen passengers, their faces blank and unblinking, reaching out as if pleading for help. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, and every creak of the hotel floor sounded like claws scraping across a deck. My parents noticed my restless sleep, but dismissed it as anxiety or overexcitement from the trip. No one could have prepared me for the horror I had witnessed. It wasn't long before I began obsessively researching disappearances at sea, historical accounts of strange maritime phenomena, and cryptids reported by sailors. The more I read, the more I realized that my experience wasn't entirely unique. There were stories, some centuries old, of strange, indescribable creatures preying on ships and isolated passengers, accounts of people frozen mid-motion, dragged into the water by unseen forces, and of ships that returned to port with passengers claiming the night didn't exist until the next morning. Patterns emerged, chillingly similar to what I had lived through. I found myself replaying the night over and over in my mind. The creature, its movements, the bundle of sheets that had once been the man. I analyzed every detail: the black pustules, the tendrils, the glistening wet legs, the horrible screech that vibrated through my skull. The more I thought, the more I realized the creature wasn't random. It wasn't attacking for sport or food. It had a purpose. It was selective, searching, studying, observing. And then, when it found what it wanted, it vanished, leaving destruction and confusion behind. I tried to push the memory away to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the stress and excitement of the trip had conjured a nightmare. But my instincts refused. Even in safe, familiar surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something lurked just beyond perception. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the scraping of metal, the drip of water, set my nerves on edge. Sleep was impossible. I was trapped in a constant state of alert, my mind refusing to rest. Weeks passed, and life attempted to return to normal. I returned to school, tried to focus on friends, homework, and my hobbies, but every so often I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a distant splash in a quiet moment, and panic would seize me. My parents, still unaware of the full extent of what I had experienced, offered comforting words, but their reassurances did nothing to quell the terror. One night, unable to bear the memories any longer, I began writing everything down, trying to make sense of it. The creature, the frozen passengers, the missing man. I documented every detail, every sound, every sensation. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to transfer the horror from my mind to the page, even if only partially. The more I wrote, the more I realized how helpless I had been, how completely powerless the passengers were, and how utterly alien and incomprehensible the creature had been. Months later, I learned that the cruise line had quietly removed that ship from service, citing maintenance and updates. There were rumors among maritime forums, hushed whispers of unusual disappearances at sea, of passengers experiencing nights they couldn't recall,
of ships that returned to port with passengers claiming the night didn't exist until the next morning. I didn't need confirmation. I had lived it. And yet, when I mentioned it online or to friends, people laughed, dismissed it as a vivid imagination or an overactive mind. Only those who had seen the unexplainable could understand. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see its massive dark form creeping over the deck, its tendrils reaching, searching, lifting. I can hear the faint squishing sounds it made, dragging the man across the wood as if he were nothing more than a rag doll. I can feel the raw, oppressive weight of its presence, the cold that spread through my body as it moved. Sleep remains a distant, fragile thing, constantly interrupted by imagined scratches and splashes and whispers of the sea at sea. I've avoided cruises since then. The sea, once a place of wonder and beauty, is now a place of fear. I cannot bring myself near it without a rising panic, my mind filling with images of that dark mass, searching, moving, taking what it wanted. I avoid stories of maritime disasters and stay away from stargazing on open decks at night. The sky, once infinite and comforting, is now a black canvas that reminds me of that night, of the frozen passengers and the screaming bundle of sheets the creature carried into the ocean. Sometimes I dream of the creature returning. I see its tendrils dragging across the deck, black pustules glistening in the moonlight, and hear that tritonal screech vibrating in my chest. In my dreams, I try to warn others, to prevent it from taking more, but the moment I open my eyes, I'm back in the cold silence of my cabin, alone and powerless. The fear has never left me, and I doubt it ever will. That night on the ship, under the infinite starry sky, changed everything. It wasn't just a brush with death, it was a glimpse into something entirely beyond comprehension. Something ancient, patient, and purposeful, moving through the darkness between worlds, hunting silently where the sea meets the night. I share this not for attention, not for disbelief or mockery, but because I need someone to know, someone to understand that the things we don't see, that we cannot explain, exist. And perhaps one day, if another ship sails in the Mediterranean or the Atlantic or anywhere the water stretches uninterrupted to the horizon, the creature will return. And I will know, as I did that night, how fragile and small we are in the vastness of the ocean. I've tried to move past it, tried to bury the memory, but it lingers, always just at the edge of perception, waiting. The scratches, the dragging, the splashes, the silence, it's all still there. And I know, deep down, that the sea has not forgotten me, and I have not forgotten the sea.
I remember the pure ecstasy, the moment I opened the envelope and realized that I had won an all-expenses-paid cruise. Winning anything had always seemed impossible to me, like some distant dream for someone else. Yet here I was, clutching a ticket to what promised to be paradise. Life had been bleak for months, the weight of monotony and depression pressing down so heavily that even simple joys seemed impossible. And then this. This cruise felt like a lifeline, a sudden escape from reality. I didn't even think about the fact that I couldn't recall entering any contest. I didn't care. I had to leave everything behind. The day of departure arrived, and I stood on the quay staring at the enormous cruise ship. Its name, Charon, sent an odd shiver down my spine, though I couldn't place why. The ship loomed over me, pristine and massive, like a floating city. Every detail seemed designed to inspire awe. Gleaming white decks, tall funnels spewing harmless plumes of smoke, rows of lifeboats that gleamed in the sunlight. I took a deep breath, inhaling the salty sea air, and felt a rare moment of peace. I stepped onto the gangway, ticket in hand, and handed it to a crew member. He barely glanced at it before waving me forward. That should have been reassuring, but something about the casual disregard for protocol felt off.
I shook it off and stepped onto the deck. I was practically floating on joy, my heart light with the thrill of adventure. Then he appeared. A man came running straight at me, his face inches from mine, screaming, "What's up?" The laugh that bubbled up from me died almost instantly when I looked into his eyes. Bloodshot, completely red, no white at all, just endless pools of manic madness. He grinned at me, and the corners of his mouth stretched unnaturally. My stomach twisted as I instinctively took a step back and bumped into the railing. He screamed again, "What's up?" before disappearing into the bowels of the ship. My heart raced. I scanned the deck for any other passengers, but it was empty, not a soul in sight. The ship's horn blared, vibrating through my chest, and we began moving. I was alone, or so it seemed, and that realization made my skin crawl. I tried to calm myself by heading toward my cabin. The corridors were silent, the faint hum of the engines the only sound accompanying my steps. When I finally reached my room, I quickly unpacked and changed into something comfortable. Checking my reflection in the mirror, I grimaced at the streaks of gray in my hair. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed past them, trying to focus on something mundane, anything to distract myself. I stepped back onto the deck, hoping a drink or a snack might distract me. Voices floated through the air, distant but clear, drawing me toward the ship's ballroom. As I approached, I noticed movement, shadows twisting, figures frozen in place. My stomach dropped. They weren't moving naturally, they were paused, like mannequins, except their eyes followed me, unblinking and manic. The closer I got, the more I realized that these weren't mannequins. I pushed open the ballroom doors. The chatter and laughter of dozens of people stopped immediately. Every eye turned to me, faces smiling unnaturally, their eyes wild. Clothing from different eras, styles that shouldn't exist together, and yet everyone moved as if perfectly normal. Except they weren't. An old woman waved me over. She cleaned under her nails with a small knife, her movements casual yet precise. Her face was lined and worn, but she smiled warmly. She reminded me of my great-aunt Gladys, though something about her seemed off, wrong. She ushered me to a chair and asked how long I'd been on board. When I said today, her expression changed, a shadow passing over her face. She sliced off 2 of my fingers. I screamed, clutching my bleeding hand, while she calmly picked the fingers up and placed them in her mouth. My vision blurred with shock and pain. Around me, the passengers watched, licking their lips, eyes locked on the blood. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me. Outside, 2 children ran past, giggling. Their skin had been peeled in places, revealing patches of skull beneath. My stomach lurched, my mind reeling. I barricaded myself in my cabin. My room had been ransacked, clothes missing, drawers open, blood smeared across the floor. I wrapped my hand in a torn shirt, pressing tightly to stem the bleeding. Sleep overtook me briefly, but when I woke, a fire axe lay in the hallway. I grabbed it, a lifeline against the horrors roaming the halls. The next few days were a blur of terror. Every corner I explored brought new nightmares. Passengers attacked without reason, their eyes fixed on me with hunger. Some fell to the axe, yet continued moving. The ship itself seemed alive, corridors shifting, hallways elongating. I discovered a skeleton in a nearby cabin, still pleading for release. My mind refused to comprehend the sheer impossibility of it.
One day, as I scavenged for supplies, I overheard the old woman again, bent over a scene that made my stomach twist violently. 2 children lay face down, skulls crushed, brains partially missing. She and a man stood over them, calm and methodical, completely indifferent to the horror they had created. I froze in place, paralyzed, before sprinting down the corridor, gasping for air, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Every hallway I explored offered new terrors. Passengers surged from shadows, advancing with unnatural speed, undeterred by injuries. I wielded the fire axe with desperation, striking, crushing, yet they kept coming. My hands were raw, muscles screaming, but I couldn't stop. Survival demanded it. When the ship docked at a port, I thought salvation awaited. But stepping onto the gangway was worse than staying aboard. A force latched onto my leg, icy and unyielding, dragging me toward an endless black void teeming with thousands of rotting corpses. I kicked and struggled, wrenched free, and hurled a decomposed hand into the water. The abyss vanished, leaving the quay normal once more. Families passed by, oblivious. I watched them with terror in my chest, wishing I could warn them. But it was too late. Later, I discovered the severed head of one of the children, her voice whispering for help. Trembling, I cast her into the water. Sharks instantly devoured her. Tears streaked my face as I stared into the sea, feeling hollow yet strangely relieved. The ship still looms behind me, its endless halls hiding horrors I cannot fathom. The passengers, the crew, the old woman, they all exist beyond reason, beyond the laws of life and death. I know my time here is limited. One wrong step, one glance in the wrong direction, and I could be next. I gaze over the railing, watching the sharks circle, and think about the man who had shouted, "Who's up?" when I boarded. He chose the sea. Perhaps, I think, it's the only true escape from this floating nightmare. My fingers ache, my muscles scream, and yet the thought of staying aboard terrifies me more than the leap into the black waves below. The ship waits. I know it does. And I know that it is patient, relentless, and always hungry. My heart races, my mind spins, but I know I must decide. Stay and face the horrors, or leap into the unknown, hoping that the ocean will take me and spare me from the nightmare Karen has become. Even now, the scratches in the deck, the whispers from the shadows, the eyes of the passengers watching from corridors just out of sight, I cannot escape them. And as night falls again, I know that whatever I choose, the ship will be waiting, patient and eternal. A predator hidden behind a veneer of luxury.
I didn't want to be here. I really, really didn't want to. The cruise ship was supposed to be healing. At least that's what my parents said. After my brother drowned 3 weeks ago, they didn't know what else to do with me. I'd spent those weeks locked away in my room, staring at the same four walls, crying until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. So they booked me this ticket, shoved a suitcase into my hands, and told me to enjoy the ride. As if stepping onto some floating hotel would erase the image of Daniel's body slipping under the water, his arms thrashing before the waves swallowed him whole. I should have refused. I should have screamed at them until they understood I didn't need distractions. But I was too tired to argue, too drained. So I let them believe that this overpriced trip would somehow stitch me back together. When I was younger, I loved ships. I used to sit for hours on the living room floor with my little toy cruise liner, pushing it across the carpet like it was gliding through the ocean. Daniel would always sit beside me, pretending to be the captain, calling out destinations. "Today we're going to Hawaii, Lily," he'd announce. "Pack your sunscreen." It was silly, but it was ours. Our dream. We promised each other that one day, when we were older, we'd go on a real cruise together. Now, here I was, standing on the deck of a massive ship, the size of a skyscraper turned sideways, except Daniel wasn't here. He never would be again. The passengers around me were buzzing with excitement, children running along the railings, their parents chasing after them, couples holding hands, talking about buffets and pools, old millionaires in pressed suits clinking glasses of champagne. It should have been lively, but for me, the noise only made me feel smaller, more alone. I gripped the railing with cold, shaky hands and stared out at the sea. The water stretched endlessly, a glittering field of black and silver under the moonlight. At first glance, it was beautiful, calming even. And for the smallest moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe, my parents were right. Maybe being here would help me breathe again. But then I remembered. This was the same water that had taken Daniel away from me. The same water I'd screamed into until my voice broke. The same water I'd searched, helplessly waiting for a head that never resurfaced. And the fleeting peace I felt dissolved into ice. My stomach twisted. I wanted to turn away, to hide in my cabin until the trip ended. I couldn't stand looking at the ocean any longer. I pushed off the railing, forcing myself to move. Maybe if I slept long enough, the days would pass quickly. Maybe I wouldn't even notice the cruise at all. But I must have taken a wrong turn on my way back. The ship was huge, and the hallways were designed like a maze, all cream-colored walls and identical polished floors. That's when I stumbled on something strange. Behind a stack of unused deck chairs, there was a narrow corridor, tucked away, almost hidden. At the end, a simple steel door with a round window. No sign, no staff-only notice, no cameras watching. I hesitated. I should have ignored it, but grief does strange things to you. I wasn't thinking about rules or logic. I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere away from the laughter and clinking glasses, somewhere no one would expect me to smile. So, I opened the door. The air that hit me was different, colder, sharper, carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded me of hospital rooms. I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake, that maybe this was a maintenance area, or worse, a restricted part of the ship where alarms would blare the second I stepped inside. I turned to leave, but the door was gone. Not closed, not shut, gone. Behind me was nothing but a stretch of steel wall, smooth and unbroken. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse spiking. I reached out, running my fingers along the wall, searching for a seam, a handle, anything. There was nothing. When I looked forward again, my stomach dropped. It was a deck, but not one I'd ever seen before. No string lights or music, no bars or families taking pictures, just endless pale wood stretching out beneath my feet, lit only by moonlight. The design didn't even match the rest of the ship. It felt older, different, like it belonged to another vessel entirely. My gut screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. There was nowhere to go. And then, Lily? My blood turned cold. That voice belonged to someone who couldn't possibly be here. At the far end of the deck, leaning against the railing with his back to me, was Daniel. My knees nearly gave out. Daniel? My voice cracked, barely a whisper. He turned. And there he was, my brother. Alive, smiling at me the way he always did when I was upset, like he could fix everything with just that one look. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, my arms wrapped around him before I could stop myself. And he hugged me back. Warm, solid, real. I missed you, he whispered. My body shook with sobs, but you're dead. He said it so simply, like it was a fact that didn't matter. But not here. I pulled back, staring at him through blurred vision. "What do you mean? Where is this?" He glanced out at the water. "Here, it's different. It's calm. Nobody interrupts us. We can talk again just like before. Dreams, plans, anything." I should have been terrified, should have questioned what was happening, how it was possible, but I didn't. I was too happy, too desperate. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. "You don't have to leave, Lily," Daniel said softly. "Stay. It's better if you stay." I nodded before I even realized it. His words sank into me like they belonged there. Staying with him, it felt right. Everything outside of this place felt wrong. He smiled and brushed a tear from my cheek. "But tonight, you're tired. Come back tomorrow. I'll be waiting."
And somehow, I was back in my cabin. I didn't remember walking there. Didn't remember how I left the deck or found my way through the maze of hallways. One moment, I was with Daniel. The next, I was staring at the ceiling of my bed. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept without nightmares. The next night, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself it was a dream, grief manifesting itself into hallucinations. That's what all the psychology articles said, right? People see their loved ones because their minds can't process the loss. But when the ship's lights dimmed and the halls emptied, I couldn't resist. The corridor was waiting for me, tucked away behind those deck chairs. The steel door was there again, as though it had never disappeared. And when I stepped through, Daniel was waiting. "Hey," he said, smiling like the last 3 weeks hadn't happened. We talked for hours about the movies we used to marathon, about the dumb raft we built that nearly sank in the lake, about the way Mom always burned pancakes. It was like nothing had changed, like we'd never grown up, never fought, never drifted. The more he spoke, the lighter I felt. My grief softened, dulled. For the first time, I laughed, actually laughed. By the 4th night, I stopped pretending. I skipped the dinners my parents had prepaid. I ignored the shuffleboard tournaments and relaxation yoga sessions. None of that mattered. The only thing I cared about was Daniel. And he was always there, always waiting for me, smiling, ready to talk. But by day 6, I noticed something strange. When I passed a glass panel on my way back from his deck, I caught my reflection. I looked pale, exhausted. My eyes were ringed with shadows, my lips dry and cracked. It was like I hadn't slept in days, even though I was sleeping. "Don't worry about it," he said when I asked. He rested a hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. "You're fine. Just stay here a little longer. You could even sleep here if you want." The offer was tempting, too tempting. But something deep inside me, something instinctual, told me no. So I went back to my cabin. By day 8, even the other passengers were starting to notice something. When I walked through the dining hall, people stared. Some with worry, some with disgust, like they could sense something wrong with me, like I was carrying something contagious. I ignored them. I didn't care what they thought. I just wanted Daniel. That night, I stayed with him until dawn. That's when the tone shifted. We were sitting on the railing, watching the waves below, when I told him the cruise would be ending soon. He didn't say anything, didn't even look at me at first. Finally, he turned, smiled, but there was something in his eyes I didn't recognize, something sharp. "Then don't leave,"
he said. I laughed nervously. Yeah, sure, I'll just live on a cruise ship forever. But he didn't laugh. I'm serious, Lily. You don't have to go back. You don't have to feel that pain every day. You could stay here, with me. Wouldn't that be easier? A chill swept through me. This wasn't Daniel. My real brother wouldn't say that. He was too selfless, too protective. He'd want me to live my life, not throw it away. My voice shook. I can't. His expression softened. I'm sorry, that was too much. Just come one more night before you leave. One last night. Please. He smiled again. That smile, the one that broke me. And I nodded, even though I knew I shouldn't.
The next day felt heavier than the others. I couldn't shake his words from my head. Then don't leave. They echoed in every corner of my mind, louder than the music in the dining hall, sharper than the chatter of passengers drifting past me. I wanted to believe it had been a slip, just some strange way of expressing how much he missed me. But deep down, I knew better. My brother had never been selfish, never. Even when we fought, even when we screamed at each other as kids, he always gave in for my sake. He'd let me have the last cookie, let me pick the movie, even let me win when I was stubborn enough to demand it. The Daniel I knew would never ask me to abandon my life. And yet, last night, he had. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I'd pack my bags, eat dinner with my parents, and wait patiently until the cruise docked again. I'd tell myself the hidden deck was grief, hallucination, or maybe even a cruel dream. I'd force myself to forget. But by nightfall, my resolution cracked. My hands trembled as I found myself slipping away, avoiding the other passengers, slipping back to that corridor I swore I wouldn't return to. The deck chairs loomed like guards, but I ignored them. The steel door waited, just as I knew it would. And when I opened it, he was there. "Hey, Lily," Daniel said, smiling, like nothing had changed, like we hadn't had that strange, unsettling conversation. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Yeah, one last time. He tilted his head, but didn't comment. Instead, he turned toward the railing, gesturing for me to follow. The deck was different tonight. The first time I'd come here, it was calm, quiet, bathed in soft moonlight. Now the air was colder, the sea restless. The waves churned violently below, black and endless, crashing against the hull with unnatural force. I stopped walking. "Daniel, what is this?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. Finally, he looked back at me and smiled. "It's just us now. We both know this is what you want. There's nothing to hurt you here." The way he said it made me shiver. I turned to leave, to run back through the door, except the door wasn't there anymore. The corridor was gone. Behind me was only endless deck, stretching on forever. Panic rose in my chest. My breaths came short and fast. "Daniel, this isn't funny. Let me out." "Please, Lily, just listen to me." He stepped closer, his face soft, pleading. "It hurts, doesn't it? Waking up every morning without me? Sitting through meals pretending you're okay? Smiling when you're dying inside? I know, because I feel it too. Every day without you is hell." His voice cracked, and I almost believed him.
Together, we don't have to feel that anymore. We can finally be happy. You can finally rest. I shook my head violently, stepping back. No, that's not what you would want. The real you would want me to live, to keep going. For the first time, his smile faltered. His jaw clenched. The air around us changed. The deck creaked and shuddered. The sky above blackening with heavy clouds. Rain began to fall, sudden and harsh, soaking my hair and clothes. And when I blinked, I wasn't on the deck anymore. I was standing in Daniel's bedroom. The same room I'd stood in the day after he died, his bed unmade, the sheets still tangled from the last night he'd slept there, clothes piled carelessly in the corner, his photo on the nightstand, framed in cracked glass where I'd dropped it the night I got the call. Daniel was there too, standing by the bed. His expression was different now. No longer calm, no longer soft. There was pain in his eyes, hurt, anger. You're really going to leave me? His voice shook. After everything I've done to come back for you? I stumbled backward, searching desperately for a door, a window, anything. But the walls seemed to close in, trembling like they were alive. Please, I whispered, my voice breaking. Stop this. Stop it already. His face twisted. Sadness, guilt, rage, all tangled together. He stepped closer, his shoulders tense. If you go, he said, his voice low, trembling, you'll forget me. That's how it works, Lily. I'll fade. I'll be gone forever. And you'll move on. You'll laugh and love and live without me. Tears burned my eyes. No, I'll remember you, the real you, not this, whatever you are. He froze. For the first time since I'd seen him on that cursed deck, he looked afraid. The room shook violently, the floorboards buckled, the walls rippled like water. My ears rang with a deep, guttural sound, as if the ship itself was groaning. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. His lips trembled. What can I do? What can I do to be more like him? I almost caved. Seeing him cry, seeing his shoulders shake, it broke me. Every instinct screamed to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. This wasn't him. My brother was gone. You can't, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. You can't. He's gone, and there's nothing you or I can do to change that. The door appeared behind me, as if conjured by my words. Daniel's face twisted. Lily! His voice deepened, warping, splitting into something inhuman. His eyes burned with something I couldn't recognize. Desperation, fury, hunger. I didn't look back. I bolted, slamming through the door with all my strength. The sound of his voice followed me, echoing, stretching, filling the corridor. Don't leave me! But when the door shut behind me, it was gone. I was back in the narrow hallway behind the deck chairs. The steel door was gone. Only smooth wall remained. My body shook violently, adrenaline still pounding in my veins. My skin was ice cold, my teeth chattering. I stumbled forward, away from that cursed place, nearly collapsing by the time I reached my cabin. That night, I didn't sleep. I clutched Daniel's old bracelet, the one he'd given me years ago on my birthday, so tightly that it cut into my palm. I repeated over and over in my head, he's gone, he's gone.
The next morning, the ship docked.
Passengers crowded the halls, dragging their suitcases, laughing about memories, already planning their next vacation. To them, the cruise was ending. To me, it felt like I just survived something I couldn't even explain. When I finally stepped off the ship, the sun was blinding. The air was warm, filled with the sound of gulls and the smell of salt. It should have been refreshing, but all I could do was look back. My eyes scanned the upper decks, searching for that hidden corridor, for the steel door, for any sign of him. But there was nothing. Just polished railings, spotless windows, tourists waving to people on shore. The corridor was gone. I stood there for a long time, my suitcase heavy in my hand, my chest hollow. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that I'd resisted, that I'd escaped. But the truth is, I don't know if I did. Because even now, weeks later, I still dream about that deck. I still see Daniel leaning against the railing, smiling at me, waiting. And sometimes, when the dreams are too vivid, I wonder if I made a mistake. If maybe, just maybe, I should have stayed.